Welcome to the Glassworking shop. Well, it's time to assemble the components. And it's always a kind of a bit of a challenge to make one of these things. The first two that I made had problems along the way, and I had to scramble to recover. And fortunately, a successful object was produced. I managed to solve all the problems that arose, but you know, it's always interesting. So I'm getting ready now. I got the pieces cut to length, at least the pieces that needed to be cut to length. And let me get over here and show what's going on. I've got the pieces lined up in the kiln, and I've got them lined up in order because the colored pieces, well, once they get hot, very difficult to tell what color they are. So I'm going to be grabbing them out of the kiln one at a time, starting from left to right, and assembling them on a fairly long 19mm punty rod, and using the NQALHA and the squeezer and handwork, and hopefully a successful object will be produced at the end. So wish me luck. I'm going to turn the kiln on and come back when it's hot. Okay, the kiln is hot and it's time to get going. So first thing I'm going to do is reconfigure the squeezer using the quick disconnect die removal. This project will require several different squeezer configurations as it proceeds, and the quick disconnect makes it possible to quickly reconfigure without bad things happening when glass is getting cold. So I am reconfigured. Gas is turned on. Ventilation is on. Let's see if we can make this pig oink. I'm using a really long 19mm solid punty, and I kind of like having I kind of like building a construction like this on a long punty. It allows me to use two hands when I'm working by hand. So I'm going to kind of gather up a little bit of a moil on the end here. I'm not sure if moil is the right term for a gather on the end of a glass punty, but whatever. I'm going to put a blob on the end. A blobulent blobulosis. Just to refresh your memory while I'm blobulizing, I'm going to throw up the schematic diagram of what's going on here. I'm going to start with the rectangular piece, which has a white core and a black outside, and I'm going to stick that on first, and then proceed to weld on the other pieces one at a time and kind of roughly squeeze them to get them to tag and to stick, and roughly squeeze them into a kind of somewhat rectangular, somewhat roughly triangular form. Then put the point of the triangle on, continue adding segments until all 7 segments have been assembled, and then squeeze that whole thing into a triangle. And like I said in the introduction, it's going to be interesting to see how this all comes out. This is not a super well practiced operation that goes smooth every time. Very, very definitely a learning process. I do it different every time. I try to remember what I did the time before. I try to remember the failures I had the time before and try to avoid repeating those. But what's even worse than a failure, and this kind of reminds me of my days writing software, that's what's worse than a bug that crashes the system? A bug that appears to work perfectly but is still there and then pops up at the worst possible time. So I'm going to go over and kind of preheat my tweezers a little so I don't totally shock the part that I'm going to be removing from the kiln. Anyway, kind of trying to talk and work at the same time is always somewhat challenging. But the problem is not the failures that I remember. The problem is the things that I thought were successful that I was actually kind of doing wrong, but they worked anyway, and I thought they were right. So anyway, I've got the center white section that I'm going to be welding on here. And I want this to be a fairly good connection because as I'm building this thing, it gets heavier and heavier, and I want to make sure that it doesn't just pop out. So kind of wiggle it around a little. Grab a glove. Rid of some of the kiln dust out in the far flame. Starting to preheat this guy. And then going to one by one grab the pieces out punty them up and weld them in place. Kiln dust off. Start heating these guys. Preheating in the outer flame. Then, going to be assembling using the NQALHA as a holding fixture. I realize that once again there's many ways of doing all of these glassworking operations, and I realize that the kind of the old school traditional way to do this is to do it with a bench torch. Getting the first one on is always the trick. Well, not going as well as I wanted it to. But like I said in the introduction, it was a bit of a tricky process. That I have not mastered even close. It definitely gets easier once the substrate becomes more stable. Getting the first one on is a tiny bit tricky. So just gently heating the assembly here. Getting it to stick together. Had a tiny bit of a misalignment, and I kind of care, but I don't care. I care because that's not what I intended, and I don't care because, hey, sometimes misalignments end up just making it look cool. Sometimes patterns like this don't have to be perfect. Sometimes I look back at the imperfections and I go, wow, that imperfection looks better than it would have looked if I would have had it perfect. So, but of course, I'm a machinist, I'm a perfectionist, and I continue to work toward doing glasswork as precisely as I can. So here comes another one. And of course, part of the misalignment is due to the fact that the center core piece, the white core piece, is actually smaller than the pieces I'm attaching to it. And this is actually not a mistake. It's kind of intentional, somewhat intentional, at least within my ability to control this stuff. I think I've gotten myself into a tiny bit of trouble here, but I will recover in no time. You just watch me. I was developing a little bit of a bow. switching to rotation mode. Now at this point, I'm only tagging them together. I'm not actually trying to compress the shape. The individual components were reasonably smooth as pulled, which of course is a pleasant surprise. So I was just trying to tag them together, get some of the air out, and now I'm going to start gently, very gently, starting to triangularize the stack. Because eventually this thing will become a triangle. I'm just starting to experiment with this method, and I believe it has merit, but I also can see many challenges in making it work. But it follows the general philosophy of using the NQALHA as a holding device and working with tools with two hands. doing is just kind of gently folding this over while keeping the whole piece hot, of course, and realizing that trying to work with a piece in midair is somewhat challenging. But I think I'm still more or less under control. I had actually thought fairly seriously about building the stack totally as a rectangle with no intermediate triangularization. And then once the thing was ready to go, doing the final triangularizing operation on it at the end. But I decided to try it this way since I've had success doing it this way. Okay. There we go. We've got a somewhat triangularized piece. And now I'm going to get the piece that's going to form the point of the triangle. This is a rod stack of a whole bunch of stuff, black and white. It's a white core with black and white bullseyes surrounding it, and then black and white alternating rods surrounding that. And that was one of my very pleasant surprises on the previous one, is how nice this piece works when it ends up flowing after being squeezed. Probably my favorite part of that last design. Yeah, black and white rods and bullseyes all stuck together. somewhat unexpected. Maybe that teaches me what I need to do next time. The pieces were all cut to correct length, but my first two pieces, as they were shaped, seem to have grown a little bit. So now my piece that I'm adding right now is a little bit short. But hey, it's glass, I can pull it. No problem. And I actually had a kind of a lucky thing happen there, that the piece I was attaching, so yeah, I do show my mistakes. Interesting to note that that one actually cracked. The weld didn't break. The glass cracked at the point of assembly. So even though I'm trying to pay attention to keeping the attachment point hot, looks like I wasn't paying enough attention. And it's kind of interesting to note the previous two of these that I did, that I mentioned earlier that I had problems with. This was always the problem. It was always the weld or the punty. And I've been trying to be really good about keeping the weld hot and keeping everything under control, but it looks like I haven't got that one yet. Haven't got that one under control, so I believe that it will be recoverable. I believe it'll be an easy recovery, but still, wiggle this guy around a little. Make sure it gets stuck but good. Yes. You can obviously see this whole snap off the punty trick is a trick I haven't quite mastered yet. Sometimes it works and sometimes it don't. And I don't want to dick around trying to snap off the punty while my piece is getting cold, or I'd have failure but good. So I've gotten a little bit out of control here. I do not believe it's a problem. I believe that I will regain control momentarily, but you know, every one of these that I do is a learning experience, and wonder how long it's going to take before I start getting it down. And of course I realize that the really good milli artists out there know exactly how to do this. And I actually know a couple of them, and when this pandemic crap is over, I might seriously consider taking lessons, because as much as I love inventing things for the first time in an art form like this that's been around as long as it has, probably a lot of people that know exactly how to do it that could just watch me and go, dude, you're making it way too hard, let me show you. Okay, that guy appears to be more or less under control. Now it's time for the next piece. I actually thought about using my stick stack method, my rod stack method of putting the cold pieces together in a fixture, putting it in the kiln, and then trying to fuse it all together in the squeezer. But as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, you know, that might be a really difficult situation to control. Of course, all of this is really difficult to control, and I'm right on the edge of out of control. It's important to realize that I'm not advocating this technique as being the perfect technique. I'm thinking it's worth working on, it's worth investigating, it's worth seeing, hey, would this even work? And in the process of developing it, pretty much from ground zero, hopefully I'm going to be able to answer some of the questions as to, is this even a good idea at all? But hey, that never stops me. And who knows? It may be possible that I will perfect this technique. It may be possible that I'll never perfect it and just go back to the traditional way of doing it by hand with a bench torch. Might also be true that somebody else out there with an NQALHA with more skill than I have will be able to look at it and go, I see what you're doing wrong. Okay, so I'm going to try a little more very gentle triangularizing here. Which is also a question that I wondered about. Should I build the thing totally rectangular and then triangularize at the last minute? Or should I work on incrementally triangularizing before putting it in the squeezer? So today I'm trying the incrementally triangularizing approach. And maybe the next one I do, I'll try constructing it purely as a rectangle and then triangularizing the result. I suspect the two approaches will produce very, very different finished pieces. I think the incremental triangularizing definitely has its own appearance, because this design really is all about how the glass flows. Got my foot pedals mixed up there for a moment. Yep. Foot pedals too close together. Got it that time. Just for a little extra insurance, weld on a bit of clear at the trouble spot. Okay, it's kind of under control, not completely under control, a bit better than the previous 2 attempts. I think I am improving at this a little bit, but very definitely kind of making it up as I go along. Which is easy for me. It's what I've done all my engineering career. Part of being an R&D engineer. Little bit by little bit, I'm gently and somewhat carefully attempting to coerce this piece into a triangular form. Just about ready to reconfigure the squeezer for the last part.